A follower wrote to me from a small village in the mountains of Guatemala with an experience that has haunted him since childhood. What his grandfather taught him about the aluxes, the guardian spirits of the Mayan tradition, and the price his family paid for breaking an ancestral pact, forever changed his understanding of the world. If you have grown up in rural towns where ancient traditions are still respected and have witnessed the consequences of ignoring them, tell me in the comments. This is the story of Miguel and the guardians who never forgive. My name is Miguel and I grew up in San Pedro Zacatepeques, a village in the mountains of Guatemala where Mayan traditions still blend with Catholicism in ways that city people do not understand. What I'm about to tell happened when I was 12 years old, but the consequences still affect my family 22 years later. My grandfather, Don Esteban, was what they called in the village a guardian of traditions. He was neither a Catholic priest nor exactly a sorcerer, but something in between. He knew the ancient rituals, spoke Quiche fluently, and more importantly, knew how to communicate with the aluxes. The aluxes are difficult to explain to someone who didn't grow up with these stories. They are not exactly goblins like in European tales, although people sometimes translate them that way. They are spirits of the earth, guardians of specific places, created by the ancient Maya to protect fields, forests, and springs. They can be benevolent if respected, but terribly vengeful if offended. My grandfather took me to the milpas since I was 6 years old, teaching me how to leave offerings for the aluxes, tortillas, pozole, tobacco. They cared for these fields long before you were born, he would tell me, and they will continue to care for them long after you die. Respect is the only thing they ask for. At night, he would tell me stories about families that had forgotten the offerings, harvests that rotted overnight, animals that fell ill for no reason, children who disappeared in the forest and returned days later with no memory of where they had been, speaking in tongues that no one understood. I was a child. I believed in these stories just like I believed in Santa Claus or the kukui, as tales to scare or teach lessons, not really real. Everything changed the summer of my 12th year. My uncle Rodrigo returned to the village after living in Guatemala City for 15 years. He had made money in construction and was coming back with big plans. He wanted to modernize the family lands, build commercial greenhouses, use chemical fertilizers, and modern irrigation systems. My grandfather immediately opposed. "Those lands have a pact," he said. "They have been worked the same way for 300 years. The aluxes know our ways. If you change everything, you break the balance." "Dad," my uncle replied with the condescending patience used by those who consider themselves enlightened, "the aluxes do not exist. They are superstitions of peasants. This village needs to modernize or it will die." My grandfather looked at me with sadness. "Miguel, remember what I have taught you. No matter what happens, never forget the offerings." During the following weeks, my uncle transformed the fields. He uprooted the old trees where we always left offerings. He leveled the ground with tractors. He installed metal and plastic structures that shone under the sun in a way that hurt the eyes. My grandfather stopped leaving his house. He sat in his rocking chair looking towards the mountains, murmuring prayers in Quiche that I did not fully understand. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 days after my uncle planted his first crops under the new greenhouses. The workers began to report that they heard things. Laughter of children when there were no children nearby. Running footsteps among the rows of plants. Small shadows moving at the edge of their vision that disappeared when they looked directly. My uncle used to send out these reports. "They are scared of the change," he said. "They will get used to it." But then the accidents began. Nothing serious at first. Tools that disappeared and reappeared in impossible places. Irrigation systems that broke down for no apparent reason. A worker fell from a ladder and broke his ankle, swearing that something had pushed him. And the plants weren't growing properly. Despite all the fertilizers and technical care, the crops looked sick, wilted, as if something was draining the life from the very soil. One night, 2 weeks after all this started, my grandfather woke me up. It was past midnight. "Come with me, Miguel," he whispered. "You need to see this. You need to understand." I followed him outside. The moon was almost full, providing enough light to walk without flashlights. We walked to my uncle's new fields, but we stopped at the edge, where the old trees used to be. "Look at them," my grandfather said, pointing towards the greenhouses. At first, I saw nothing, just the metal structures shining under the moonlight. But then my eyes adjusted, and I saw them. Small figures, maybe a meter tall. moving between the rows of plants. There were dozens of them. They were humanoid, but clearly not human. Their limbs were too long in proportion to their bodies. They moved in ways that defied normal physics, as if gravity did not fully affect them. And what they were doing to the plants was horrible. They were uprooting them, twisting them, spitting something on them that made them wilt instantly. It was not random destruction. It was deliberate, methodical, vengeful. "The Aluxes," I whispered. "Yes," my grandfather confirmed. "They are furious. Your uncle destroyed their sacred places without asking for permission, without making offerings of apology. Now they are taking their revenge." "What can we do?" My grandfather sighed deeply. "I can try to negotiate, but I don't know if they will listen to me. The damage is already done." For the next 3 days, my grandfather performed rituals. He burned copal, spilled pozol in the corners of the fields, and spoke in Quiche for hours. I helped him, following his instructions exactly, leaving offerings of tobacco, cacao, and honey in the places he indicated. My uncle looked at us with disdain mixed with worry. His fields were dying, and no amount of chemicals or agricultural experts could explain why. On the night of the 3rd day of rituals, my grandfather finally received an answer. We were in the field with candles forming a circle when it appeared. Not one of the small Alexes I had seen before, but something larger, older. It was about 1.5 meters tall, dressed in what appeared to be clothing woven from leaves and bark. Its face was almost human, but with features that were slightly off. The eyes too large, the mouth too wide. It spoke in Quiche, its voice resonating in a way that you felt in your bones more than in your ears. My grandfather translated as they conversed. "It says the pact is broken," my grandfather explained to me. "The lands are no longer protected, but there is a way to restore the balance." "How?" My grandfather swallowed hard, his eyes filling with tears. "They want a sacrifice, not blood like in ancient times, but something valuable. Someone from the family must leave the land forever, abandoning all claims, and the one who stays must become the guardian, continuing the traditions without fail for the rest of their life." "I will go," said my uncle, who had secretly followed and witnessed everything. His voice trembled. "I caused this. I will pay." The elder Alex nodded slowly. But then he pointed at me and spoke directly. My grandfather translated, his voice broken. "He says the boy must choose. He can go with his uncle to the city, away from this land, and live a modern life without the burdens of traditions, or he can stay, learn the ancient ways, and become the next guardian when I die." I was 12 years old. It was an impossible decision. But looking at my grandfather, seeing the tears in his eyes, knowing how much traditions meant to him, knowing that without a guardian the Aluxes could become even more vengeful, I made my decision. "I'll stay," I said. The great Alex studied me with those large, inhuman eyes. Then he nodded and spoke one last time before fading into the air. "He says you have chosen wisely," my grandfather translated. "The pact will be renewed, but with stricter conditions. There must never be tractors on this land again. No more chemicals, no more modern constructions, only the old methods. And the offerings must be made not once a week, but every day, without fail. Not a single day can be omitted." My uncle sold his modern equipment at a huge loss. He left the village a week later and never returned, not even for my grandfather's funeral 5 years later. During those 5 years, my grandfather taught me everything. How to read the signs in nature, which plants to use for which rituals, how to speak with the Aluxes, although never directly as he could, only through offerings and ritual gestures. And every day without fail, we made the offerings, fresh tortillas, pozol, tobacco, in specific places at specific times. It was exhausting. It meant I could never leave the village for more than a day. I could never go to parties in neighboring villages. I could never have a normal teenage life. My schoolmates teased me. They called me the sorcerer, the crazy one from the milpas. I left school at 14 because the offerings took so much time that I couldn't fulfill both responsibilities. My grandfather died when I was 17. On his deathbed, he grasped my hand with weakened strength. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive me for tying you to this, but someone must do it. Someone must maintain the balance." "I know, grandfather. I understand. If you ever want to leave it, if you want to be free, there is a way, but it has a terrible price." He explained the ritual to me. I could transfer the responsibility to another willing person in the family, but that person had to fully accept it, understanding everything, and the one transferring the burden would lose something in the process. Memory, years of life, something valuable. The Aluxes did not allow you to simply abandon a pact without consequences. For the next 16 years, I continued the offerings. Every day, without fail. I married a woman from the village who understood and accepted my role. We had 2 children. I teach them the ancient ways, but I have not yet asked them to take on the burden. The fields thrive under my care. Our harvests are the best in the region, even though we use only traditional methods. Other farmers ask me for my secret. I can't really explain it to them. How do you explain that it's because every morning at dawn you leave tortillas for invisible spirits? Sometimes I see them, the Aluxes, especially during the harvests. Small figures moving among the plants, touching them with what seems to be affection, protecting from pests, guiding the rainwater to where it is most needed. And sometimes the elder Alux appears. He doesn't speak anymore, but he nods when he sees me, a recognition that I am fulfilling my part of the pact. But I am 34 years old now. I am tired. The weight of the daily offerings, of never being able to leave the lands, of knowing that if I forget just one day the consequences could be catastrophic, is overwhelming. My eldest son is 12 years old, the same age I was when I made my choice. And I see the question in his eyes when he accompanies me to make offerings. Why do we do this? Does it really matter? Couldn't we just stop? I have considered the ritual my grandfather explained to me, transferring the burden. But how do I ask my son to accept this life? How do I steal his future, his freedom as mine was stolen? And yet, what happens if I let the pact break? What the Aluxes did to my uncle's fields was just the beginning of what they can do when they are truly angry. History is full of entire towns that disappeared after offending the guardians of the land. 3 months ago, something changed. My son began to see the Aluxes without me telling him where to look. He sees them naturally, just as my grandfather could. It is a sign. The Aluxes have chosen him as the next guardian, just as they chose me. Last night, the elder Alux appeared while I was making the offerings. He spoke for the first time in 16 years. I didn't fully understand the Quichua words. My command of the language was never as good as my grandfather's. But I grasped the essence. It's time. I must choose soon. To transfer the pact to my son voluntarily while I can still teach him properly. Or to wait until forced by more urgent circumstances, perhaps my own death, and risk that it is done incorrectly. I have been awake the last 3 nights, watching my son sleep, debating. What kind of father condemns his son to this life? But what kind of guardian allows centuries-old traditions to be broken out of cowardice? My wife tells me it is my decision, but I see the fear in her eyes. She has seen what happens when the Aluxes get angry. She has heard the stories from neighboring towns where they stopped making offerings and faced years of ruined harvests, inexplicable illnesses, disappearances, and I have noticed something else recently. The little Aluxes are getting closer to the house. I see them through the windows at night watching. Not exactly threatening, but expectant, waiting. They know that the decision is approaching, and they have their own opinion on what it should be. My son asked yesterday, "Dad, why do the little men from the fields look at me so much?" "Because you are special," I told him. "You can see them, not everyone can." Is that good or bad? I couldn't answer him, because honestly, I don't know. My grandfather told me it was an honor to be chosen, but sometimes it feels more like a curse. Tomorrow is a full moon. It is the traditional time to renew pacts, to make transfers of responsibility between guardians. I have prepared everything necessary for the ritual. Special copal, posel made from sacred corn, tobacco of a type that is becoming rare. My son knows that something important will happen. I see it in the way he looks at me with those 12-year-old eyes that seem much older than they should. Tonight I will tell him the whole story, about my grandfather, about my uncle, about my own choice at his age. And then I will give him the option that I never fully felt I had. You can choose to become a guardian, learn the ways, make the offerings, bear the weight. Or you can refuse and we will look for another solution. Perhaps you can find another family member willing. Maybe there is a different ritual that my grandfather did not know. Or maybe we simply let it all end. Let's break the pact. Let's face whatever comes. and let's learn firsthand if ancient traditions still hold power in the modern world, or if my uncle was right and they are just superstitions that keep people trapped in the past. But looking out the window now, seeing dozens of small figures gathered at the edge of the field, their eyes shining in the dark as they wait, I think I already know the answer. The Aluxes are real. The pact is real. And the consequences of breaking it would be more real than anything a modern person is prepared to face. So tomorrow, I will probably hand my son the same fate that was handed to me, and I will live the rest of my life knowing that I condemned him to an existence of serving forces that most of the world has forgotten exist. It is the weight of the guardian, not just the daily offerings, but the guilt of passing the burden to the next generation, knowing they have no real choice, not really. Because what happens if the only one in the family who can see the Aluxes refuses? What then? I guess I will find out soon. So far, the story of Miguel. He contacted me 2 weeks ago saying that he finally spoke with his son, who agreed to become a guardian. The ritual was performed during the full moon and was apparently successful. If you have grown up in communities where ancient traditions are still practiced and know the weight of keeping them alive, I would like to hear your experience in the comments. Sometimes the obligations we inherit define our lives in ways we never choose. Sleep well tonight. There are stories that one receives and needs a moment before narrating. This is one of them. It was sent to me by a follower named Andres from Venezuela, and what he describes happened during a job he accepted out of necessity in a town in the interior of the country. Andres did not believe in demons. He also did not believe in pacts. But there are things that one sees with their own eyes that leave them no choice but to reconsider everything they thought they knew. If you have a story that has marked you like this, write to me. I love receiving your accounts. And if you are hearing this for the first time and you like this type of content, welcome. Now, let's go with what happened to Andres the night he entered the wrong house. I was 29 years old when I accepted that job, and now I am 36. And there are still nights when I wake up at 3 in the morning with my heart pounding in my chest, not knowing exactly why. My body remembers even if I try to forget. My name is Andres, I am an electrician, and at that time I was doing contract work in different parts of the country because the economic situation didn't allow for much choice. When I was called for an electrical remodeling project in Cumaná in the state of Sucre, I accepted without thinking twice. 3 weeks of work, accommodation included, reasonable pay. It was exactly what I needed at that moment in my life. The project was in a large house on the outskirts of the historic center, owned by a gentleman named Don Esteban who lived in Caracas and wanted to remodel the property to rent it out. The house had been vacant for several years, and the electrical installation was a disaster. Old wiring, damaged panels, outlets that did not meet any current standards. It was a thorough job, one that I enjoy because it requires attention and cannot be done halfway. The accommodation the contractor found was a guest house 6 blocks from the house. Clean, basic, with breakfast included. The owner of the guest house was a woman in her 60s named Doña Petra, short, quick in her movements, and with a gaze that seemed to assess you in seconds. On the first day when I told her which house I was going to work at, she paused for a moment. "The house of Esteban Vargas?" she said. "The one on Bolivar Alley?" "That's the one," I said. Doña Petra nodded slowly with an expression I couldn't quite read at that moment but learned to recognize over time as caution. "Finish that job quickly," she said, "and don't stay after dark." I asked her why. "That house has a reputation," she said simply, and changed the subject. I didn't think much of it. Old houses always have a reputation. It's part of being old. The first day of work was completely normal. I arrived at 8 in the morning with my toolbox, inspected the existing installation, made the diagnosis, took measurements, and planned the materials. The house was large, 2 stories with high ceilings and thick walls like those built in the past. It smelled of confinement and stopped time, that characteristic smell of spaces that have been uninhabited for a long time. The windows had been closed for who knows how long, and when I opened some to ventilate, the light that came in showed me the dust floating in the air like suspended snow. Nothing unusual, nothing that warranted any warning. I worked until 6 in the evening, gathered my things, and went to the boarding house. I had dinner with Mrs. Petra and 2 other guests, a traveling salesman and a university student, and I went to bed early because the work for the next day was going to be long. The second day was just as quiet. The third one, too. I was getting used to the rhythm of work, to the house, to its own noises of old wood that expands with the heat and contracts at night. I learned it sounds like one learns the sounds of any space where one spends hours. It was in the afternoon of the fourth day when I noticed the room. It was on the upper floor, at the end of the hallway, with the door closed. It was no different from the other doors in the hallway, same size, same dark wood. But when I went to open it to inspect the interior electrical installation, the doorknob wouldn't turn. It was locked. I noted it down on my to-do list to report to the contractor. I needed to check that room too. I couldn't leave it out of the work without a reason. That afternoon, back at the boarding house, I mentioned the locked room to Mrs. Petra. Mrs. Petra looked up from her things and looked at me. "What room?" she asked. "The one at the end of the upstairs hallway, to the left." Doña Petra placed what she had in her hands on the table with a care that seemed deliberate to me. "Don't open that room," she said. "I have to check the electrical installation of the whole house, Doña Petra. That includes that room. Tell the contractor that that room has no wiring," she said. "It has always been that way. It doesn't need checking." I looked at her for a moment. "How do you know that?" Doña Petra held my gaze. "I've been in this neighborhood since I was born, Andres. I've known that house since before you were born." I asked her what was in that room. Doña Petra fell silent for several seconds. Then, in a lower tone, she said, "The previous owner of that house was a man named Celestino Mora. He died 12 years ago. Celestino was a practitioner. Do you know what that means?" I told her I wasn't sure. "He made deals," said Doña Petra, "with things that don't have pretty names. That room was where he worked, where he received them. After Celestino died, no one has been able to enter there without something happening." "What kind of things happen?" "It depends on the person," she said. "But they are never good things." That night I took longer than usual to fall asleep. Part of me, the rational and practical part that has always been dominant, dismissed what Mrs. Petra had told me as local superstition. Neighborhood legends, the kind of story that grows around an old house with an eccentric owner until it becomes unrecognizable. I had seen that before in other places, how a simple story becomes layered with each repetition until it seems monstrous. But there was something in the way Mrs. Petra spoke that was not the tone of someone repeating legends. It was the tone of someone reporting facts. The next day I spoke with the contractor, a man named Eduardo, who coordinated the work from Caracas over the phone. I told him there was a locked room on the upper floor that I needed access to. Eduardo was straightforward. Don Esteban said that room stays as it is, not to include it in the work. Why? He didn't explain. He just said to leave it. So we leave it, Andres. Continue with the rest. I left her. In the following days, I made progress with the rest of the house. The electrical installation was complex but manageable, and the work was going well. I got used to the space, to its proportions, to the way the light changed hour by hour. It was a house that had once been beautiful and could be again with work and attention. The problem started in the second week. It was a sound at first. I heard it on a Tuesday afternoon, when it was almost 6 and I was picking up tools on the ground floor. A soft, repeated thump coming from above, like someone walking very slowly on the upper floor, with heavy and slow steps on the wooden boards. I stood still listening. The steps continued. They moved back and forth along the upper corridor, unhurried, with that mechanical regularity that sounds have when there is no intention behind them, that are just the physics of a moving object. I went up the stairs. The corridor was empty. No one. Nothing out of place. The doors all closed, just as I had left them. Complete silence. I checked every open room. Nothing. I told myself, old wood, temperature, expansion, and contraction. I told myself this with conviction, and I believed it. The next day the steps returned, at the same time, with the same rhythm. On the third day, I stayed on the upper floor waiting for them. I sat on the floor of the hallway with my back against the wall and waited. At 5:40 in the afternoon, punctual as something with a fixed schedule, the footsteps began. And they were coming from the closed room, not from the hallway, not from any open space, from inside the locked room at the end on the left, Celestino Mora's room, which according to Mrs. Petra was better left unopened. I got up and approached the door. The footsteps continued on the other side, now clearly audible, clearly coming from that closed space. Footsteps of someone walking back and forth in a small room. A deliberate rhythm, almost like that of someone who is waiting. "Who is there?" I said. The footsteps stopped. Absolute silence for several seconds. Then, from the other side of the door, I heard something that sent chills down my spine with an efficiency I had never experienced before. A breath, long, slow, deep, like someone was just on the other side of the wood, face pressed against it, breathing. I stepped away from the door and walked down the stairs without running, because something inside me said that running would be a mistake. I left the house, locked the gate with the padlock they had given me, and walked the 6 blocks to the boarding house without looking back. I told Mrs. Petra what I had heard. She listened without interrupting, with that expression of hers that suggests she already knows the end of the story before you get there. "Did you get close to the door?" she asked when I finished. "Yes." "Did you put your hand on the doorknob?" "No." Mrs. Petra briefly closed her eyes. "Good," she said. "If you didn't touch the doorknob, you didn't accept anything. That's how it works. As long as you don't open, there's no invitation." "Invitation for what?" Doña Petra took a moment before responding. She got up, went to the kitchen, and returned with 2 cups of coffee. She placed one in front of me. It was late for coffee, but I accepted it. "Celestino Mora was a man who sought things," said Doña Petra, sitting down. "He had money, he had time, and he had a curiosity that knew no prudent limits. He started with minor things, what we call jobs here, bindings, cleansings, things that people know. But Celestino wanted more than that. He wanted to talk to something that would truly respond to him. And did he find it?" "He found it," said Doña Petra. "He spent several years searching, according to what his sister once told me, who was the only person close to him during that time and still lives in the neighborhood. He traveled, learned, brought things from other places. And at some point in that process, something in that room responded." "What kind of something?" "The guy who has no name, that one would want to say out loud," said Mrs. Petra, and she said it without drama, as a technical fact. "Celestino made a deal with him. He asked for things that I won't detail because it's not my story to tell. And for years he lived well, very well, according to the people in the neighborhood. Prosperity, health, things he didn't have before." "And the payment?" Mrs. Petra took her coffee. "The payment arrived when Celestino died," he said. "But it turns out that what he left behind in that room didn't only take him. It also took those who came after. 2 families have tried to live in that house in the 12 years that the property has been changing hands. None lasted more than 2 months. What happened to them? To the first family, the father started having dreams that weren't his, dreams that left him so exhausted that by the 2nd month he couldn't work. They left. To the 2nd family, the mother said she heard voices giving her instructions. They left before the 1st month. It was after that that Don Esteban bought the property cheap with the idea of remodeling it without living in it and renting it to people who didn't know the history. I remained silent, processing that. "And what's inside that room now?" I asked. "What has always been there," said Mrs. Petra, "and will continue to be there as long as no one moves it, confronts it, or opens that door. Sometimes you hear it, sometimes you feel it, but as long as no one enters, it stays inside." "Like the mirror of your history," I said without thinking. Mrs. Petra looked at me without understanding the reference, because it was only mine. "As long as you don't open, there's no invitation." I repeated her words. "Exactly," she said. "Finish your work and leave, Andres. This is not your story." The following days I spent with that in my head. I kept working, I kept progressing, and the footsteps continued every afternoon at the same time. I got used to them in a way that does not make me proud. I listened to them, mentally registered them, and continued with my own. Like Mrs. Petra, one learns not to listen. But on the night of the 14th day, something changed. That night I made a mistake. I had forgotten a tool at home, a specific tool that I needed early the next day and that I didn't have a duplicate of. I noticed it while having dinner at the boarding house, and I figured that if I went quickly, I could pick it up and come back in no more than 20 minutes. It was 9:30 at night. Doña Petra was in her room when I left. I didn't warn her. I didn't want the conversation that would have followed if I told her where I was going. I walked the 6 blocks in the warm night of Kumana. The neighborhood was quiet, some houses with lights on, the distant sound of a television, dogs barking at something invisible. I arrived at the gate of the house, unlocked it, and entered. The ground floor was dark. I took out my phone's flashlight and used it to orient myself. I found the tool exactly where I had left it, in the kitchen, on the counter where I had been working that afternoon. I picked it up and headed towards the gate. And then I heard something. Not the usual footsteps. Something different. A sound coming from the upper floor, from the hallway. But it wasn't the familiar rhythm of footsteps. It was more like a dragging sound, as if something very heavy was slowly moving across the wooden floor of the hallway above. I stopped. The dragging continued, slow and deliberate, moving from the back room toward the beginning of the hallway, toward the stairs. I didn't look up. I kept my gaze straight ahead, at the gate that was about 6 meters from where I was, and I walked toward it with steady steps. I didn't run. I told myself not to run. That urgent movement was a sign of recognition, that if something expected a reaction, giving it one was the worst thing I could do. I reached the gate. I put my hand on the latch. And then I heard, from the top of the stairs, a voice. It wasn't the breathing from last time. It was a complete voice, clear, with a strange cadence but perfectly articulated. It didn't say words that I could recognize as words. It was a language that didn't exist in any dictionary I knew, with a musicality that had something of singing and something of threat, both at the same time. I unlocked the bolt, went out, closed the gate, and walked the 6 blocks back to the boarding house. I didn't run, but when I arrived at the boarding house and entered and closed the door behind me, I sat in the first armchair I found and took several minutes to be able to breathe normally. Doña Petra came out of her room. She looked at me. She said nothing. She went to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water. She gave it to me. She sat in front of me and waited. When I could speak, I told her what had happened. Doña Petra listened. When I finished, she asked me one thing. "Did you open any door inside?" "No," I said. "I just picked up the tool and left." "Did you respond to the voice?" "No." Doña Petra nodded. "Then you are fine," she said. "You didn't open, you didn't respond. There is no invitation." What would have happened if I had responded? Doña Petra looked at me for a moment. "I don't know for sure," she said. "No one who has responded has been able to explain it well afterward. I finished the work in 4 more days. I worked quickly, faster than I was used to, and I left that house every afternoon before the footsteps began. I didn't return at night. I didn't forget any tools. On the last day, before I left for good, I stopped for a moment in the hallway on the upper floor. I looked towards the back room. The door was closed, silent, with nothing visible to distinguish it from any other ordinary door. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe closure. Maybe I just wanted to see it in the daylight, with light, with my tools in hand and the gate open behind me, to tell myself that it was just wood and hinges and an old lock. I looked at it for a long moment. And from the other side, very softly, almost inaudible, 3 knocks came. Spaced out, slow, like a response. I turned around, went down the stairs, left the house, and closed the gate for the last time. That afternoon, at the boarding house, while I was packing my suitcase, Doña Petra appeared at the door of my room. "Are you almost done?" she asked. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said. Doña Petra nodded. Then she said something I never forgot. Celestino's sister once told me that when he made the deal, the condition was that whatever came into that room could stay as long as no one took it out, and that the only way to get it out was to offer it something in return. Offer it what? That's what no one has wanted to find out, Doña Petra said, and that's why it's still there. I left Cumana the next day. I took the first available bus and didn't look back when the neighborhood disappeared among the houses and palm trees of the coast. 7 years have passed. Sometimes I think about that room, about what is inside it, still and patient, waiting for someone to open the door and answer the voice, about how many people must have passed through that house since then without knowing what is at the end of the hallway. I don't know if Mr. Esteban managed to rent it. I don't know if anyone lives there now. I didn't seek to find out because there are questions whose answers change nothing, they just weigh you down more. What I do know is this. In the jobs I did afterwards, in the old houses with rooms locked with keys, I learned a rule that I keep without exception. If the door is locked, I first ask why. And if the answer has too many doubts, or too much silence, or the tone of someone who knows more than they say, I leave the door as it is. As long as you don't open it, there is no invitation. That's all Andres wanted to share. He wrote to me that since that experience, he has changed the way he does his work, and that he has learned to read the warnings that people give without finishing what they are saying. That skill, he says, has saved him from more than one problem. There are things in this world that work with very simple rules, and the most important of all seems to always be the same. What you do not invite cannot enter. Thanks to Andres for sharing this. If you also have a story that you have kept inside and feel deserves to be heard, write to me. There is space for everyone. We'll talk soon. Take care. There are stories that reach this channel and create a discomfort that is hard to shake off. This is one of them. It was sent to me by Isabel, an elementary school teacher who lives in Mexico City. She wrote to me very calmly, with precise words, like someone who has processed what she experienced, but still needs to tell it out loud to fully believe it. If you are listening to this from your bed tonight, with the lights off, you might want to turn on a small light before continuing. And if something has ever happened to you that you don't know how to explain, write to me. I take the time to read every message. This is what Isabel experienced for 3 weeks in her own apartment, with a mirror that she bought herself at an antique market. I am a teacher. I have been teaching 6- and 7-year-old children to read and add for 19 years. And during that time I have developed a patience and calmness that have served me in almost everything in life. I am one of those people who do not get easily upset. My friends say I have nerves of steel. My son Tomas says I'm boring because nothing scares me. They were both right until a few months ago. It all started with the mirror. I found it on a Saturday in October at an antique market about 10 blocks from my apartment. I often go to that market, not because I'm looking for something in particular, but because I like to walk among the old things, imagining their stories, the lives of the people who used them. It's a form of rest I discovered when Tomas was small and I needed some alone time to recharge my energy. The mirror was at the back of a stall that sold dark wood furniture and antique metal objects. It was rectangular, with a carved wooden frame, one of those elaborate frames that are hardly made anymore, with intertwined flowers and geometric figures that someone had worked on with a lot of care and time. The wood was dark, almost black, and the glass had that slight imperfection that old mirrors have, a barely perceptible waviness that makes your reflection have a slightly different quality than that of a modern mirror. Softer, more diffused at the edges. I liked it immediately. I asked the seller what price it had, and he told me a reasonable number. I asked him where it came from, and he shrugged. It had been left to him by a lady who was liquidating the furniture from an inherited house, and he didn't know more. I bought it, took it to the apartment in a taxi, and hung it on the wall of the hallway that connects the living room to the bedrooms. Tomas saw it when he came back from his dad's house that afternoon. "Where did you get that?" he asked. I told him from the market. He stared at it for a moment with that expression teenagers have when something catches their attention but they don't want to admit it. "It looks old," he said. "It's antique." I corrected him. "There's a difference." He smiled and went to his room. And that was it. For several days, the mirror was simply a mirror, a nice object in the hallway that I liked to see as I passed by, which reflected the light from the ceiling lamp well and made the hallway feel wider. In the first few days, I didn't notice anything. It was in the second week when I started to feel something that at that moment I didn't know how to name. A very specific discomfort when passing by the mirror. Not a fear, not something as defined as that. Rather, a resistance to looking at it directly, like when you know there's something in the periphery of your vision but you'd rather not turn to see it head-on. I walked down the hallway looking at the floor, or looking towards the living room, without stopping to see my reflection as I had done in the first few days. I noticed it and explained it to myself logically. I was tired from the semester. Working with the kids was exhausting me more than usual that month, and fatigue sometimes produces those sensations without any real reason. I ignored it. It was Tomas who said something first. It was a Wednesday night. We were having dinner, and he asked out of the blue, "Mom, does the hallway mirror always reflect the same?" I looked at him. "What do you mean, does it always reflect the same?" "I don't know." Sometimes when I pass by, it seems like the reflection takes a moment to follow me. I said it calmly, without alarm, with that practical curiosity that teenagers have when they observe something without knowing if it matters or not. I placed the spoon on the plate and looked at it for a moment. Old mirrors have imperfections in the glass, I said. Sometimes that creates strange visual effects. Thomas nodded and continued eating, and I kept eating too. But something in that conversation kept resonating in some corner of my mind for the rest of the night. That night, before I fell asleep, I walked down the hallway deliberately slowly, looking at the mirror straight on. My reflection looked back at me, with my hair tied up and the expression of someone searching for something they don't quite know what it is. Everything seemed normal. The reflection moved when I moved, without delay, without visible anomaly. I went to sleep telling myself that Thomas was right, that it was simply the old glass with its irregularities. 3 days later, what I could no longer explain with the old glass happened. It was a Friday night. Thomas was with his dad that weekend and I was alone in the apartment. I had eaten dinner early, corrected some notebooks of my students, and around 10:30 I went to the bathroom before going to bed. To get to the bathroom, you have to cross the hallway where the mirror is. I passed by it without thinking, and then I stopped. I don't know exactly what made me stop. It was something I registered in the periphery of my vision, something that didn't belong. I turned to look directly at the mirror. My reflection was looking at me. That shouldn't be strange. It's what mirrors do. But there was something different about that reflection, and it took me several seconds to identify what it was. My reflection didn't have exactly the same expression as me. I was standing in the hallway with a neutral, slightly tired expression. The reflection in the mirror had its head very slightly tilted to one side, at an angle that I didn't have. I stood completely still. My heart skipped a beat that I hadn't felt in years. I slowly moved my head to the left. The reflection moved too, to the left. Correct, normal. I moved my head to the right. The reflection moved to the right. Also correct. I stood there for almost a minute, looking at the mirror, moving slowly, searching for the moment when the reflection wouldn't match. I found nothing. Everything was normal. The head tilt I had noticed was no longer there. Or perhaps it had never been there. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe it was the poor light in the hallway at that hour of the night. I went to the bathroom, washed my face with cold water, and lay down. It took me a while to fall asleep. The next day, in the morning light, the hallway looked completely normal, and the mirror reflected with the clean clarity that things have in daylight. I took my coffee standing in front of it, looking at myself with all the deliberation that I hadn't had the night before, and I found nothing strange. My reflection was perfectly synchronous, perfectly precise. I told myself it had been fatigue. I convinced myself quite successfully, but I started to avoid the hallway at night. I did it without realizing at first, going around through the kitchen to get to the bathroom when it was late, leaving the bedroom door open with the light on so I wouldn't need to turn on the hallway light. Only after several days did I realize what I was doing, and I stopped to think about it. I, who according to my son was not afraid of anything, was reorganizing my routes within my own apartment to avoid passing in front of a mirror at night. The next time something happened was on a Tuesday. Tomas was in the apartment, in his room studying. I was in the living room preparing materials for the next day. It was around 9 at night. I heard Tomas leave his room and walk down the hallway towards the kitchen, and then I heard him stop, and he didn't continue. I waited. Maybe 2 minutes of silence passed. I got up and went to the hallway. Tomas was standing in front of the mirror looking at it with an expression I couldn't quite interpret at first. It wasn't exactly fear. It was more like the intense concentration of someone trying to solve something. Tomas, I called him. He turned to me with a quickness that indicated he hadn't heard me come in. What happened? I asked. He looked at the mirror again, then looked at me. Nothing, he said. Nothing at all. What did you see? A short pause. For a moment it seemed like there was someone else in the reflection. I froze but kept the calm expression that years of being a teacher have given me. Like someone else, like a silhouette, behind me. But when I turned around, there was nothing. And when I looked in the mirror again, it wasn't there either. Tomas was looking at me with that direct assessment that teenagers have when they want to know if their parents are going to take something seriously or dismiss it. "Have you seen anything strange in that mirror?" he asked me. I didn't lie, but I didn't tell him everything either. "I've noticed things I can't explain," I said. "We'll talk calmly tomorrow." That night I didn't sleep well. Not because I was exactly afraid, but because something had changed. It was no longer just me. Tomas had seen something too, and that shook everything I had managed to build as a rational explanation for the previous days. The next morning I told Tomas that I was going to take the mirror out of the hallway. He didn't object. He helped me take it down, and we put it in the storage room, leaning against the wall, covered with an old sheet. The moment I took it out of the hallway, something in the atmosphere of the apartment changed. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The hallway felt lighter, more ordinary, more like a normal hallway in a normal apartment. That should have been the end. I store the mirror, the problem disappears, life goes on. But it wasn't the end. That same night, past midnight, I woke up. For no apparent reason, just as it had happened in the country house with the cold that night. I simply opened my eyes and was completely awake. The room was silent. The streetlight came through the curtain and drew a pale strip on the floor. And there was something in the corner. I couldn't see it clearly. The room was dark and the corner even more so. But there was a density there that didn't correspond. A concentration of shadow slightly different from the rest of the darkness, with a shape that suggested the verticality of something standing. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I think the brain, when faced with something it genuinely cannot process, sometimes just freezes as a protective mechanism. The shape, or whatever it was, remained still for what must have been 2 or 3 minutes. And then, very gradually, like fog dissolving as the temperature rises, it unraveled. It didn't disappear suddenly. It became less dense until the corner was simply normal darkness again. I lay there, rigid, with my heart pounding, until dawn began to break. When I had enough light to convince myself that there was nothing in the corner, I got up. I went straight to the storage room. The sheet we had used to cover the mirror was on the floor. The mirror was uncovered, with the reflective side facing out. There was no one else in the apartment. Tomas was with his dad that week. I had slept with my bedroom door closed. No one had entered. No one had discovered that mirror. I left the storage room, locked the door, and stood in the hallway for a long time, processing what I had just seen and what I had seen in the corner of my room. Then I did something I had never done in my life. I went to knock on my neighbor's door. Doña Consuelo had lived in the apartment next door since before I moved in. She was a woman of almost 80 years, petite, with white hair and very bright eyes, who had spent her life in that building and knew its walls better than anyone. We weren't exactly friends, but we had that familiarity of longtime neighbors. We greeted each other in the elevator, exchanged cooking products when one of us was missing something, and let each other know if there was any problem in the building. It was 6:30 in the morning, early to knock on someone's door. But I knocked. Doña Consuelo opened with an expression that was not of annoyance but of alertness, as if she had been expecting someone to call. "Isabel," she said. "Come in." I told her everything. Not in an orderly manner, but as things come out when you've been awake for hours and are nervous. In fragments, jumping from the beginning to the end and back, mixing details. Doña Consuelo listened to me without interrupting, with a cup of tea in her hands, looking at me with those bright eyes that missed no detail. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. "Did you buy it at the Álvaro Obregón market?" she asked. I was surprised by the specificity. "Yes, at the back, at Don Gerardo's stall." "I think so." Doña Consuelo left the cup on the table with the gesture of someone who has just confirmed something they already suspected. "That mirror has been circulating for years," she said. "I've seen it appear and disappear in that market. Every so often someone buys it, and every so often someone returns it or throws it away. Once a family left it on the street, in the neighborhood up here. It lasted a week before someone else picked it up. I asked her what she knew about it. What I know is what my mom told me, that she saw it when she was young. She says that this mirror had an owner a long time ago who did things with it that he shouldn't have done, that he used it as a door." "A door to what?" Doña Consuelo looked directly at me. "To whatever is on the other side. I don't know the whole story, but I do know that what enters through that door doesn't leave alone." I asked her what needed to be done. She told me that it wasn't enough to just store it or cover it, that more than one person had already tried that there was a way to close it, but it involved returning it to the right place. What is the right place? There is a lady in Tepito who knows about these things. My mom met her. I have never needed her, but I have the contact of someone who did go to her. Doña Consuelo gave me a phone number written on a little piece of paper that she took out of a drawer, as if she had kept it saved for the moment someone needed it. I called that very morning. The lady's name was Remedios, and she had a calm and straightforward voice that didn't sound like nonsense or drama. I explained the situation in general terms. She told me she could see me that afternoon. I went to her house with the mirror wrapped in a sheet, carrying it in the taxi with the reflective side facing inward, as Doña Consuelo had instructed me. Remedios' house was on a quiet street, an old tenement with an inner courtyard full of plants. She was waiting for me at the door. She was a woman in her 60s, with short hair and firm hands, who wore nothing special and had nothing in her house that made her look different from any neighborhood neighbor, except for some shelves in the living room, filled with candles of different colors and several objects that I did not know how to name. She examined the mirror with the meticulous care of someone who knows exactly what they are looking for. She turned it, checked the frame, ran her fingers over the wood carving. Then she leaned it against the wall with the reflective side facing the wall and turned to me. "Did you see anything in the corner of your room?" she asked. "Yes." "Was this the first night you stored it?" "Yes." "Normal," she said, with a calmness that was both unsettling and comforting to me. "When access to the mirror is interrupted, what uses the mirror as an entry seeks another point. The room where you sleep is the point of highest energy in the apartment because it is where you spend the most hours." I asked her if there was real danger. Remedios considered the question seriously. "Immediate danger, no. What is in that mirror is not something that seeks to cause harm directly. It's more like something that exists in another plane and found a crack to look into this one. The problem is that when something of that kind establishes presence, over time it becomes more permanent, harder to move." "How long has it been established?" "Since long before you bought it. But each new home where the mirror arrives gives it fresh energy. You and your son gave it to it." She explained the process to me. It was more concrete and less dramatic than I would have imagined. It involved cleaning the mirror with certain elements that she would prepare, sealing the frame to close what was open, and finally placing the mirror in a specific location where it could not be picked up and taken to another home. "Can't it just be destroyed?" I asked. "It can be. But breaking an object that functions like this without the proper process sometimes disperses the presence instead of containing it. It's better to close it first." I was at Remedios' house for almost 2 hours. I'm not going to detail every step of what she did because, honestly, there are parts that I didn't fully understand, and I don't want to describe them incorrectly. What I can say is that the process was calm, methodical, without any fuss. Remedios worked with a quiet concentration, like someone doing a technical job that she knows well. At the end, the mirror had its frame sealed with something she applied to the joints of the wood, something dark and thick that smelled like resin, and something I couldn't identify. She told me to take it back to the market where I had bought it and return it to Mr. Gerardo, the seller, and to tell him exactly what she would tell me. I went to the market the next day, Saturday morning. Mr. Gerardo was at his stall. When he saw me arrive with the wrapped mirror, his expression was that of someone who sees something they were already expecting to see. "You're bringing it back," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Remedios sent me to tell you that it is already closed and cannot be sold again." Don Gerardo looked at the mirror for a moment. Then he nodded. "It was not my intention to sell it," he said. "I was left with it and didn't know what to do with it. I assumed that if someone bought it, it was because it was theirs. What are you going to do with it now?" "What I should have done from the beginning," he said. "Call Remedios." I left it in its place and left. That night, in the apartment without the mirror, the hallway felt different in a way I can't exactly describe. More neutral, more ordinary, more completely mine. I slept soundly that night, without waking up, without shadows in the corners. When Thomas returned on Sunday and saw that the mirror was gone, he didn't ask what had happened. He just scanned the hallway with his eyes, then looked at me, and nodded with the expression of someone who understands without needing the details. That was 5 months ago. Nothing has happened since. The hallway is just a hallway. The storage room no longer makes me uncomfortable when I enter. Tomas has become the teenager who doesn't believe in anything supernatural again, or at least that's what he pretends. I'm still a teacher. I am still the person with nerves of steel. But now, when I walk through the antique markets, which I still visit because I still enjoy them, I pay more attention to the mirrors. Not obsessively, just with the new awareness that objects have stories and that some of those stories continue, silently, within their surfaces, waiting for someone to open the door to a new home for them. I don't buy antique mirrors. That has changed. That's all Isabel wanted to share. She wrote to me at the end of her message that she still goes to the antique market almost every Saturday, that the pleasure of walking among old things hasn't disappeared, it just became more careful. It seems to me an honest conclusion. There are things that change us without breaking us, that simply adjust the way we look at the world. If you ever bought something at a second-hand market and felt that you brought something more than the object, tell me about it in the comments. Those stories always catch my attention. Sleep well tonight. We'll talk soon. Recently, I received the testimony of Marco, a freelance photographer who agreed to document a witchcraft ritual in the mountains of Oaxaca. What his camera captured that night haunts him to this day. If you have experienced something that defies all logic, share it in the comments. I love reading each of your stories. What follows is disturbing, so prepare to delve into the darkest night Marco ever lived. My name is Marco, and I am a documentary photographer. For 15 years, I have traveled throughout Latin America, capturing cultures, traditions, and moments that others prefer not to see. I have photographed indigenous rituals, syncretic religious ceremonies, pagan festivals. I thought I had seen everything the spiritual world had to offer, until I met Don Esteban. It was October of last year. I was in Oaxaca working on a project about pre-Hispanic traditions that survive in rural communities. A local contact told me about Don Esteban, a sorcerer who supposedly practiced ancient magic, the real deal, not the tourist spectacle sold in markets. It's dangerous, my contact warned me. Don Esteban doesn't play. If you're going to photograph him, you must completely respect his rules. And what you see, you might wish you hadn't seen it. Of course, that only heightened my interest. I had documented ayahuasca shamans in Peru, santeros in Cuba, curanderos in Guatemala. I knew how to navigate those circles, how to show respect while capturing powerful images. I found Don Esteban in a small village called Santa Maria Yavesia, hidden in the mountains. His house was a modest adobe structure with a garden full of plants I didn't recognize. He was in his 70s, sun-weathered skin, deep black eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Are you here to mock what you don't understand?" was the first thing he said to me in Spanish with a strong Zapotec accent. I come to document with respect. I have photographed sacred ceremonies before. I know how to behave. Don Esteban studied me for a long time. Those who came before photographed performances. I do not perform. What I do is real, and the real has consequences. I understand. No, you do not understand, but you will learn. He paused. You need to be present at 3 ceremonies. Just 3. After that, you will leave and never return. Do you accept? I accept. Then come tomorrow at dusk, and bring only your camera. No electronics that have batteries or chips. The old does not like the modern. That night, in my hotel room, I checked my equipment. I had an old analog Pentax camera that I had inherited from my grandfather. Perfect for this. I bought several rolls of black and white film, the kind that war photographers used decades ago. The first ceremony was the next day. Don Esteban took me to a clearing in the woods, an hour's walk from the village. There was a circle of ancient stones covered in moss and carved symbols that glowed faintly in the light of the sunset. This is a cleansing, he explained. A woman from the village is sick. The doctors cannot help her. She says something is chasing her in her dreams, that it is consuming her from the inside. The woman arrived shortly after, accompanied by her husband. She was young, maybe 30 years old, but she looked emaciated, ill. She had deep dark circles under her eyes and was constantly trembling. Don Esteban began the ritual while I photographed from a respectful distance. He lit copal, the sweet smoke filling the clearing. He sang in Zapotec, words that sounded ancient, powerful. He passed herbs over the woman's body, tracing symbols in the air with a ceremonial knife. Through the viewfinder of my camera, I saw something extraordinary. Around the woman, barely visible as a distortion in the air, there was something dark. A shadow that did not correspond to any source of light. And while Don Esteban sang, That shadow writhed, as if it caused her pain. I quickly took photographs. The ritual lasted 2 hours. When it ended, the woman seemed better. The color had returned to her cheeks. She was no longer trembling. She thanked Don Esteban with tears in her eyes and left with her husband. "Did you see the shadow?" Don Esteban asked me. "Yes. I'm not sure what it was. It was what was killing her. A spirit sent by someone who envies her. Now she is free." He paused. "And you? Did you capture anything on your camera?" "I won't know until I develop the role. When you do, you will see things that your eyes did not see. The camera captures more than the visible." That night I couldn't sleep. There was something in the ritual I had witnessed, an authenticity I had never felt before. It was neither acting nor psychological suggestion. He had seen something real. The second ceremony was 3 days later. This time it was different. "It's a pact," Don Esteban explained as we walked to a different place in the mountains, deeper in the forest, where the trees grew so thick that hardly any daylight reached. "A man wants power. He is willing to pay the price." "What kind of power?" "The power to see the future, to know what is coming before it arrives. It's useful for business to avoid disasters, but it has a cost." We arrived at a natural cave on the side of a mountain. Inside there was a stone altar covered with black candles, animal skulls, and symbols painted with something that looked like blood. The man who wanted the power arrived at dusk. He was middle-aged, well-dressed, clearly wealthy. He looked nervous but determined. Don Esteban explained the rules to him. "You will receive the gift of foresight. You will see 3 days ahead in time. But every time you use this gift, you will age a week. Your life will shorten with each vision. Do you still want it?" The man hesitated for just a moment. "Yes." The ritual that followed was darker than the first. Don Esteban sacrificed a black rooster, letting its blood drip onto the altar. He sang in a language that was neither Zapotec nor Spanish, something older, more guttural. The air in the cave became heavy, difficult to breathe. I photographed everything, my hands trembling slightly. Through the viewfinder, I saw something that froze my blood. There was another presence in the cave. Not human. It manifested as a dark, dense shape near the altar, pulsating with its own life. Don Esteban called to this presence, speaking to it with respect mixed with caution. He offered the blood of the rooster, the man's hair, and something else I couldn't see clearly. The presence seemed to accept. It moved toward the man, momentarily enveloping him. He screamed, not in pain, but in shock. When it was over, the man had glassy eyes, as if he were seeing something that no one else could perceive. "It is done," said Don Esteban. "Now go, and remember the price." The man stumbled out of the cave. I followed him with my gaze until he disappeared among the trees. "Can you really see the future now?" I asked. "Yes, and he will regret it. They always regret it. The future is not meant to be seen. It changes those who know it." Don Esteban packed his ritual tools. "Tomorrow will be the third ceremony, the last, and the most dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "We will invoke something ancient. Something that should not be disturbed, but that sometimes needs to be awakened. I need you to understand. In this ceremony, if something goes wrong, I won't be able to protect you. You will be alone with your camera and your decisions." "What are we going to invoke?" "Here we call it the Devourer, a spirit that existed before the Spaniards arrived, before the Zapotecs built Monte Alban. It is old and hungry, but it is also just. It punishes those who deserve it." "And why invoke it?" "There is a man in the village who has done terrible things. He has raped girls, killed those who stood in his way. The police do not touch him because his family has money and power. But the Devourer cannot be bought." That night, back at my hotel, I seriously considered not going to the third ceremony. I had gotten incredible photographs from the first two. I already had more than enough material for my project. Why risk it? But curiosity, that damned curiosity that defines my profession, was stronger. I had to see. I had to document. On the third night, Don Esteban took me to the most remote place we had visited. We walked for 3 hours, using only the light of the full moon to guide us. We arrived at a cenote, a natural well of black water surrounded by ancient rocks. "This place is sacred," said Don Esteban. "Here sacrifices were made in ancient times. The spilled blood has saturated the earth. That's why the Devourer can manifest here more easily than in other places. There were others present this time." 5 elders from the village, all dressed in white, all with serious expressions, and tied to a tree near the cenote, the accused man. He was large, burly, with an expression of absolute terror on his face. "Wait," I said to Don Esteban. "Are they going to? We are not going to kill him. The devourer will decide his fate. If he is innocent, nothing will happen to him. If he is guilty..." He left the sentence unfinished. The elders formed a circle around the cenote. Don Esteban stood in the center, looking toward the black water. He began to sing, and the elders joined him. The melody was unsettling, dissonant, making my skin crawl. I photographed from outside the circle, as Don Esteban had instructed me. "No matter what happens, do not enter the circle. If you cross that line, the devourer will think you are also an offering." The singing continued for what seemed like hours. The moon rose in the sky, reflecting on the water of the cenote, and then gradually the water began to move. Not as if it were the wind, but as if something beneath was stirring it. Through my camera I saw bubbles rising from the depths, and then, emerging from the water, a shape. At first, it seemed to be just more water, taking a vague form. But it solidified, it defined itself. It was vaguely humanoid, but completely incorrect in its proportions. Arms too long, head too big, eyes that shone with their own yellowish light. Its skin, if it could be called that, seemed to be made of constantly flowing black water. The devourer. The bound man began to scream, struggling against his restraints. The screams were of pure, primal terror. The devourer moved toward him, gliding over the ground without really walking. Don Esteban spoke in that ancient language, presenting the accused, listing his crimes. The devourer stopped in front of the man, leaning down to look him directly in the eyes. What happened next was so horrible that I almost stopped photographing. The devourer reached out a hand toward the man's chest. The fingers, like water tentacles, penetrated through the clothes, the skin, entering his body. The man stopped screaming. His eyes turned white, and then, horrifically, he began to wither. It was like watching someone age 100 years in minutes. The skin wrinkled, the hair turned white and then fell out, the muscles atrophied. In 5 minutes, what remained tied to the tree was little more than a mummified corpse. The devourer withdrew, satisfied with its judgment. It slid back into the cenote and disappeared beneath the black water, leaving only ripples that eventually calmed. The elders cut the bindings of the corpse and let it drop into the water. "This is how it is always done," Don Esteban explained. "The cenote claims the bodies of the guilty. They will disappear in days, completely consumed." He was in shock, barely able to process what he had witnessed. I had instinctively photographed everything, not really thinking about what I was capturing. "We're done," said Don Esteban. "You've seen the 3 ceremonies. Now go and don't come back. I need to develop these photographs." "Do it. But be careful with what you do with them. Showing this kind of truth to the world has consequences." I returned to the city 2 days later, with the 3 undeveloped rolls of film in my bag. I took them to a lab specialized in analog photography, one where I personally knew the technician. "Marco, it's been years since you worked with film," he commented as he received the rolls. "Special project?" "Something like that. Be very careful with these. They are important." We developed them together in the dark room. When the first images began to appear in the developing liquid, my technician let out a low whistle. "What the hell did you photograph?" The images from the first ceremony clearly showed the shadow around the sick woman, but it was more defined in the photograph than what I had seen with my eyes. It almost had a human shape, with claws reaching out toward the woman, as if it were embracing her, and his face, barely visible, was a grimace of pure malice. The images from the second ceremony were even more disturbing. The presence in the cave appeared as a dark, dense mass with what seemed to be multiple bright eyes, and in one particular photograph, one of those eyes was looking directly at the camera, as if it knew it was being photographed. But the images from the third ceremony, those were the ones that kept me awake for weeks. The devourer was clearly present in every photo, but it was not just a creature. In the images, you could see through its translucent form, and inside it were faces, dozens of them, faces of people who seemed to be screaming, trapped within the entity. Souls of the guilty that I had judged throughout the centuries. And in the last photograph, the one I took just before the devourer retreated to the cenote, it was looking directly at my camera, and behind it, blurry but unmistakable, was me. Not my reflection, but me standing inside the circle, as if the photograph captured not what I was, but what I could have been if I had made the mistake of crossing that line. "These photos are incredible," my technician said. "You could win awards with this. What kind of effects did you use?" "There are no effects. It's all real." He looked at me as if I were crazy. "Marco, whatever you're saying, these images are disturbing. What do you plan to do with them?" Good question. I had documented something extraordinary, visual proof of the supernatural. I could publish these photos, create an exhibition, write a book. My career would take off. But I remembered Don Esteban's words. Showing this kind of truth to the world has consequences. I stored the photographs in a sealed envelope and left them in my apartment. For days I thought about what to do. Then the dreams began. Every night I dreamed of the cenote. In the dreams I stood on its shore looking at the black water. And every night, something emerged from the water. Not the devourer, but something different each time. Shadows, spirits, entities that wanted to be seen, to be known, to be freed. And all of them whispered the same thing to me. Show us, reveal us, let the world see us. I began to fall ill. Constant low-grade fever, headaches, nausea. The doctors found nothing wrong, but I knew what it was. The photographs, the entities I had captured, wanted something from me. I called Don Esteban using the number he had given me for emergencies. I told him about the dreams, about the illness. "The images are cursed," he simply said. "You captured something that was not meant to be captured. Now those entities have a connection to you through the photographs. They want to be released into the world, and you are their door. What should I do? Destroy the photographs, burn them. It's the only way to break the connection. But it's my job. It's the proof of everything I saw. Then keep one, just one, the one you consider most important. But the rest must be destroyed, or they will consume you." That night, I spread all the photographs across my table. There were 36 in total, 12 from each ceremony. Each one was extraordinary in its own way, showing aspects of the spiritual world that few people had seen and even fewer had documented. Choosing one was the hardest decision of my career. Finally, I selected a photo from the first ceremony. It showed Don Esteban with his arms outstretched, the copal smoke swirling around him, and the dark shadow being expelled from the sick woman. It was powerful, beautiful in its strange form, and less disturbing than the images of the devourer. I took the other 35 photographs to an empty lot outside the city. I burned them one by one, watching as the fire consumed the images of shadows, spirits, and ancient entities. As they burned, I felt something release. A pressure that had been in my chest since I revealed the photos gradually eased. The dream stopped that night. The fever disappeared the next day. But I had learned my lesson. There are truths that are not meant to be widely shared. Secrets that must remain in the shadows. Not everything that is real should be revealed. The only photograph I kept is now in my safe deposit box. I have never shown it publicly. I have never published it. Sometimes I look at it, remembering that night in Oaxaca, remembering that the world is much stranger and darker than most people want to believe. And sometimes, when I look at that photograph under the right light, I swear the shadows in it move slightly, as if the entities I captured were still there, trapped in that frozen moment, waiting. I have continued my work as a documentary photographer, but now I avoid certain subjects. I do not photograph real magic rituals, no document ceremonies that invoke spirits. I have learned that my camera, like any tool, has limits that should not be exceeded. 3 months ago, I received a message from someone in the town where I met Don Esteban. The message was brief. Don Esteban passed away peacefully. Before he died, he said to tell you that you chose wisely, that the doors you did not open are better sealed. I don't know if Don Esteban really said that or if it was the messenger's invention, but the words gave me a strange comfort. I had been on the edge of something vast and dangerous, and I had stepped back just in time. Sometimes I think about those photographs I burned, about the images of the devourer, about the faces trapped within its form. I wonder what would have happened if I had published them. Would the world have taken them seriously or dismissed them as photographic tricks? Would more people have sought out Don Esteban and others like him, asking for power, revenge, forbidden knowledge? I don't know, and I'm glad I don't know, because some questions are better left unanswered. Some doors are better left closed, and some truths are better left in the darkness where they belong. But I have that one photograph. My reminder that magic is real, that spirits exist, that the invisible world is right next to the visible one, separated only by a thin veil that sometimes in certain places, under certain circumstances, becomes transparent. And every time I look at that photograph, I remember Don Esteban's warning. The camera captures more than the visible. He was right. My camera captured truths that should never have been seen. And although I destroyed most of those images, the memory remains. Imprinted not on film, but in my mind. Impossible to burn. Impossible to forget. I now live with that knowledge. With the certainty that we walk surrounded by forces we do not understand. That our rational and orderly world is just a thin layer over something much older, wilder, more dangerous. And although I no longer photograph those hidden worlds, I know they are still there. In remote mountains of Oaxaca, in dark cenotes, in forgotten caves. Waiting for those who are curious enough or foolish enough to seek them out. I was both, and I was lucky to return. That is the story Marco shared with me. He told me he still has that unique photograph saved, but he will never show it to the public. There are things, he said, that are better left hidden. If you have ever captured something in a photograph that shouldn't be there, tell me in the comments. Sometimes the camera sees what our eyes prefer to ignore. Rest well, and we'll meet in the next story. I received this account from a follower named Lucia, who worked as a night librarian at a private university in Montevideo, Uruguay. What she found during an inventory of ancient books in the basement and the consequences of opening a sealed grimoire forced her to leave not only her job but the entire city. If you have ever worked with ancient books or forbidden manuscripts and felt that some pages should not be read, let me know in the comments. This is the story of Lucia and the book that released something that had been waiting for centuries. My name is Lucia, and for 5 years I worked as a librarian at San Ignacio University in Montevideo. It wasn't a large university, but it had an impressive library, especially its collection of rare books and ancient manuscripts dating back to the colonial period. My job was mainly administrative, cataloging new acquisitions, assisting students with research, maintaining order in the reading rooms. But once a year, during the summer holidays when the university was almost empty, I was assigned a special task. Taking inventory of the rare book collection in the library's basement. It was a tedious job, but one I enjoyed. I spent days alone in the basement, surrounded by books that were hundreds of years old, some so ancient that you had to wear white gloves to handle them. There were Bibles from the 16th century, obsolete scientific treatises, collections of poetry by forgotten authors, and my favorite, natural history books with hand-drawn illustrations of plants and animals. Last summer, during my 5th annual inventory, I found something that was not in any catalog. I was in the farthest section of the basement, behind shelves that probably hadn't been moved in decades. There was a wooden box, old and covered in dust, so thick that I had to wipe it with a cloth to see what was engraved on the lid. The engravings were strange symbols, not religious in the traditional Catholic sense, but something older. Circles within circles, stars with too many points, words in what seemed to be Latin but distorted. The box was locked with a rusty iron padlock. I searched for a key in the library archives, but there was no record of this box at all. It was as if someone had hidden it there and then erased all evidence of its existence. My professional curiosity overcame my caution. I used a pry bar to break the padlock. Inside the box, wrapped in black fabric that disintegrated at the touch, was a book. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of a modern notebook, 20 centimeters by 15, but it was thick, at least 300 pages, bound in what seemed to be dark leather that felt strangely warm to the touch. The cover had a single symbol engraved in gold that still shone after what must have been centuries. And when I opened the book, I felt something, a pull, as if something inside was happy to finally be discovered. The first pages were in Latin. I could read enough to understand that it was some kind of grimoire, a book of ritual magic. The date on the first page said 1624, and the author identified himself only as Brother Augusto of the Order of Seekers. There were diagrams of ritual circles, lists of ingredients for potions and ointments, instructions for invoking and controlling lesser spirits, and in the later sections, something darker, rituals for opening doors between realms. and trading with the hungry. As a librarian and historian, I knew that these books existed. 17th century Europe was obsessed with the occult, alchemy, and magic, but I had never seen one firsthand. What made this book particularly unusual was that approximately 2/3 of its pages were sealed, literally sealed with red wax that had been melted between the pages, sticking them together. And on the wax, there were stamped symbols similar to those on the cover. On the last unsealed page, there was a warning written in ancient Spanish. Whoever reads beyond this point invokes what they cannot control. The sealed pages contain knowledge forbidden by order of the Holy Inquisition. They were sealed with protection rituals and must remain so until the end of time. May God have mercy on the soul of whoever breaks these seals. I should have stopped my research there. I should have catalogued the book as a dangerous historical artifact and locked it away. But there was something in those sealed pages that called to me, a curiosity that went beyond the professional, that felt almost like compulsion. Over the next few days, I researched everything I could about Brother Augusto and the Order of Seekers. I found very little. There were vague references in Spanish Inquisition documents about a heretical order that operated secretly in the American colonies in the early 17th century. They supposedly practiced ceremonial magic by mixing Catholicism with indigenous traditions and occult knowledge brought from Europe. The order was pursued and destroyed around 1630. Its members were executed and their books burned. Apparently, this grimoire had survived, hidden, forgotten for almost 400 years. And now it was in my hands. On the night of the summer solstice, alone in the basement of the library at 2 in the morning, I made the stupidest decision of my life. I decided to open the sealed pages. I used a knife to carefully pry under the wax, trying not to damage the paper underneath. The seals resisted. The wax was harder than it looked. But eventually they began to give way. When I broke the first seal, I felt a change in the air. The temperature in the basement dropped noticeably. My breath became visible. And I heard something. A whisper, barely audible, as if someone were speaking from very far away. I continued. I broke the second seal, the third, the fourth. With each broken seal, the whisper grew louder, clearer. I still couldn't understand the words, but there were definitely voices. Multiple voices speaking at the same time in languages I didn't recognize. Finally, all the sealed pages were open. I spread them carefully and began to read. What those pages contained was disturbing. They were not just rituals. They were contracts, written agreements between Brother Augusto and entities he called the hungry of the threshold, entities that existed in a plane adjacent to ours, feeding on vital energy, waiting for opportunities to cross. The described rituals were not to briefly invoke these entities to ask questions or request favors. They were to open permanent doors for them, to give them anchors in our world in exchange for power. And on the last sealed page, there was a specific ritual, the ritual of the dark mirror summoning. According to the text, this ritual would open a stable portal that would allow the hungry to cross freely between worlds. Brother Augusto never completed the ritual. There was a note in the margin saying that the Inquisition had discovered his plans and that he was being hunted. He sealed the pages in the hope that someday, someone worthy would find them and complete his work. As I read this, the whispering voices had become clear. They spoke in ancient Spanish now, directly in my mind. Finally, someone has broken the seals. Complete the ritual, Lucia. Open the door for us. I froze. They knew my name. How could they know my name? We have been waiting, watching through the cracks between worlds. We have seen you work in this place. We chose you. You are curious, intelligent, and ambitious enough to want more than what life has given you. It was true. I had been frustrated with my career. 5 years in the same position, with no promotions, no real recognition of my work. I had started to feel like my life was stagnant. Complete the ritual and we will give you knowledge, power, the ability to change your reality. Everything Brother Augusto sought and more. You just need to open the door. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding wildly. No, I was not going to perform any ritual from a 17th century magic book. This was ridiculous. The voices were probably hallucinations caused by working too many hours in a poorly ventilated basement. But when I tried to get up to leave, I found that I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't respond. And the book in my lap opened by itself, the pages turning until it reached the ritual of the dark mirror summoning. Read it, the voices commanded. Read the ritual aloud. It's all you need to do. Just words. What harm can simple words do? My mouth opened, and without my conscious intention, I began to read. The words flowed from me in Latin, a Latin I didn't know I could speak. My voice echoed strangely in the basement, creating echoes that shouldn't exist in that space. And as I read, things began to happen. The basement lights flickered and dimmed. Shadows in the corners grew deeper, more solid. And in the large mirror hanging on the back wall of the basement, used to check that the books were properly positioned on the shelves, something began to appear. At first it was just a distortion on the surface of the mirror, like ripples in calm water. But gradually the ripples became more violent. And behind the glass I could see something moving, shapes pressing against the mirror from the other side, trying to break through. When I finished reading the ritual, my mouth closed and control of my body returned. I stumbled to my feet, moving away from the mirror, the book, everything. But it was too late. The mirror cracked. A fissure appeared in its center, spreading like a spider web. And from the fissure, something began to seep. It was neither liquid nor gas, but something in between. Tangible darkness spilled from the mirror like ink in water. And from that darkness, they emerged. The hungry. They had no fixed form. They were a mass of shadows that constantly shifted, vaguely taking on humanoid shapes before dissolving into something completely different. Where their faces should have been, there were black voids with what appeared to be mouths, circular openings filled with needle-like teeth arranged in spirals. And they were hungry. I could feel it emanating from them like heat from an oven. A hunger that had been unsatisfied for centuries, contained behind seals and barriers, finally unleashed. They moved towards me, gliding over the ground without really touching it. The voices in my mind were now a chorus. "Thank you, Lucia. Thank you for opening the door for us. Now, as is customary, the one who opens the door must be the first to feed us." I stepped back, stumbling over boxes of books. "No, I didn't know. I didn't want to. But you did. You read the ritual. You broke the seals. Your intention doesn't matter. The consequences are the same." The closest creature extended what could be an arm. When its shadow touched me, I felt something being pulled from me. Not physically, but something deeper. Life energy, memories, emotions, everything being drained like water through a drain. I fell to my knees, suddenly exhausted. And as the creatures moved closer, I saw my life flowing towards them, feeding them, making them more solid, more real in our world. I was going to die here, in the basement of a library, drained until I became an empty shell by entities I had foolishly unleashed. But then, something else appeared. Another figure materialized in the basement, but this one was different. It looked human, a middle-aged man dressed in the black habit of a 17th century Catholic priest. And when he spoke, the creatures stopped. "Enough," he commanded with a voice that resonated with authority. "She is ignorant of the true laws. She cannot be claimed under the rules of the ancient pact." The creatures turned to him. "Brother Augusto, you have been watching, always watching, waiting. I knew that eventually someone would find my book. I had hoped it would be someone more prepared. But it doesn't matter. The rules are clear. Only a voluntary practitioner who fully understands the consequences can be claimed as payment for opening the portal." "She read the ritual," the creatures protested. "Under compulsion. You forced her. That nullifies the contract." Brother Augusto turned to me. "But the portal is open, and it must be closed properly or more of the hungry will cross." "How?" I managed to ask weakly. "There is a closing ritual in the book, but it requires a sacrifice. Someone must stay on their side when the portal closes, acting as a living seal." "You?" He nodded sadly. "I have been waiting for this moment for nearly 400 years. When the Inquisition captured me, I managed to escape through the spiritual realms using the same knowledge I had learned. But I was trapped between worlds, neither fully dead nor fully alive. This is my chance to finally find rest. What do I need to do?" Brother Augusto indicated the book to me. "Read the sealing ritual. It's in the last pages. When you finish, the portal will close with me and with them on the other side." I took the book with trembling hands and found the ritual. It was in Latin, but this time I understood the words somehow, as if the knowledge had been implanted in my mind by the previous ritual. I began to read. The words flowed from me, and I felt power moving through the basement. The mirror began to glow with a white light that pulsed in sync with my reading. The creatures roared with fury, trying to reach me to stop me, but Brother Augusto stood between them and me, creating some kind of barrier with his remaining energies. "Quick!" he shouted. "I can't hold them off much longer." I read faster, the Latin words becoming a torrent. The light from the mirror intensified to blinding, and then, with one last phrase, the ritual was completed. The mirror exploded. Glass fragments flew everywhere, but instead of falling, the fragments were pulled towards where the mirror had been, forming a vortex, and in that vortex, the Hungry and Brother Augusto were sucked in. I heard their last word before disappearing: "Forgive." The vortex closed. The glass fragments fell to the ground. The basement was left in absolute silence. I stayed there, trembling, barely able to process what had happened. The grimoire in my hands suddenly felt heavy. I looked at it and saw that the pages I had opened were darkening, the words disappearing as if they were written in ink that was evaporating. In moments, all the pages of the ritual were blank. The knowledge had been consumed in the closing of the portal. The book was now just an inert historical artifact. I left the basement and went straight to the library director's office the next day. I told him I had had an accident with the mirror in the basement, that it had fallen and broken. I showed him the grimoire, but only the blank pages, explaining that it was probably just a blank notebook that someone had lavishly bound as a joke centuries ago. He accepted my explanation without questioning it. Why wouldn't he? The alternative was too absurd to consider, but I knew the truth. And I couldn't continue working in that basement, in that library, knowing what was there, what could still be there in other undiscovered books, in other sealed artifacts. I quit 2 weeks later. I left Montevideo completely, moving to Buenos Aires to start anew. Now I work in a modern bookstore that only sells books published in the last 10 years. Nothing old, nothing with a dark history. But sometimes, when I pass by mirrors, I see something in my reflection. A shadow that shouldn't be there. A movement in the periphery that disappears when I look directly. And I wonder if I really closed the portal completely, or if I left some crack, some residual connection between the Hungry and our world. A connection that uses me as an anchor because I was the one who originally freed them. I have no answers. I only live with the uncertainty and the guilt of knowing that my curiosity almost destroyed the barrier between our world and something dark that had been contained for centuries. The grimoire of Brother Augusto remains in the rare book collection of San Ignacio University. It is probably now catalogued as a blank notebook from the 17th century, a historical curiosity without real value. But I know what it was, and I pray that no one else has the foolishness to investigate too deeply, to search for hidden seals, to attempt to restore the words that have faded from its pages, because the Hungry are still there, on the other side, waiting, hungry, and they will always seek another opportunity to cross, another portal to open, another curious and ambitious soul that can be manipulated to break the seals that contain them. Brother Augusto sacrificed his eternal rest to close the portal that I opened. It is a sacrifice I cannot forget, nor a weight I can lay down. That is my story, my confession, and my warning. If you ever find a sealed book, pages stuck together with ancient wax and strange symbols, leave it closed. Some doors were sealed for very good reasons, and some things waiting on the other side must remain there forever. Thus ends Lucia's testimony. She told me that she still has nightmares about the Hungry Ones and that she completely avoids old books now. If you have ever worked in libraries, archives, or special collections and have encountered sealed or forbidden books, I would like to hear about your experience in the comments. Sometimes knowledge comes with a price we are not prepared to pay. Sleep well tonight.